I'm grateful that you even brought that case to my attention. And I'm, grateful to be a small, tiny part of getting that case more attention. And I think that that is what's special about all this is you said it really well, and I've ripped this off several times, is that people die twice. They've got their natural death and then the death when they're forgotten. And so it's important to keep these people's memories alive by talking about them and remembering them. And that's something that I've taken to heart and that I try to do in my podcast.
That's Cameron Santana, a listener and the host of his own true crime podcast.
And then I will touch on another thing that I had personal growth on and a little bit of a confession, which I publicly put out there. When Jessica died, I had a really bad view of her due to some of that combat that was going on in some of those chats years ago. And when Jason put her in a smaller group that I was in, I was like, because I've been busy with some other stuff and I hadn't been in on a lot of the things going on in the true crime space, podcast groups or whatever. And so I was a little taken aback and I thought, well, that's interesting, but I thought, this is the thing, Jason, you're safe. I know that you would never put people together in a situation unless it was safe. And so I thought, well, this is interesting. Well, within a day or two, then she was gone. And so then I started seeing all the tributes to her and all the things that people talked about, how much she changed. And then I started reflecting on some recent chats with her. And in the prosecutor's podcast chats, and I realized that she had changed significantly from the chats that we had been in before. And that made me look at myself and say, wow, how judgmental. You didn't even give her a clean chance. You were, you still considered her like she was 30 years ago instead of what she was now. And so on her tribute thing, I wrote about that because, I wanted people to understand from my perspective that I had changed, her death changed me because it made me think about being judgmental about people as to who they were, not who they are.
That's Marie Holdridge, a listener and a 2-time guest on a listener's episode.
I felt like I came back down to the ground and got acquainted with it. And then different opportunities started opening back up for me. I started writing again, which I had stopped doing also, because I am a writer by trade. And I would still make that claim even though I hadn't been writing. So I wrote a book with a dear friend of mine this past year that we're still working on, but the first draft is done. And then the death of Jessica, it opened the door back open, or opened the door back open. You can tell I don't podcast as much as I used to. Really opened the door, and found that those relationships that, because she and I had remained in contact while I was sort of often trying to heal myself. And she kept that, I called her a conduit between me and Jason and other people in that community. And when she died and reconnecting, especially with Jason, it was both like the most horrible thing in the world just because of her, her loss, but it was also just wonderful to reconnect and remember her and the value and the contributions that she made. And Marie, again, I totally relate.
That's Allison Dickson, a friend, a frequent guest on the podcast, and a listener.
So I have had a pretty challenging year. I had some just personal relationships that some unfortunate events occurred. I also got really sick with the flu. I had to put one of my dogs down while I was sick with the flu. And just kind of, I spent spent a lot of the year, I think, I don't know, not feeling sorry for myself, but it was just a sad year, I feel like. But I am proud of myself for kind of trying to get out of my bubble and going to CrimeCon. That was a big deal for me because I went by myself, and I'm glad that I did that. Of course, Jason, you made it much better. So I'm really proud of myself that for doing that and being able to kind of put myself in that situation that was really uncomfortable for me. So I think for the coming year, I hope I can continue to kind of challenge myself in that kind of way and put myself out there more and continue to just grow personally and learn to be more comfortable with myself, and we'll see where it goes.
That's Lauren Ater, a listener and one of my partners in crime at CrimeCon this year.
And our publisher gave us a checklist. And one of the things on my checklist was they were like, you have to set up social media. They're like, you don't have any social media. I'd never been on social media before. And they said, you don't have any social media. You need an X account, an Instagram. I still haven't set up a Facebook. But like I did set up, the X was for whatever reason, the first account I set up. And I remember I just started posting stuff and I didn't know what I was doing and just started posting stuff about like the book and everything right when it was coming out, I believe. And you sent me a message that was on X. You reached out because I was posting, I think I had posted some pictures of Virginia Olsen, and you had the ties to, you were familiar with McLean High School, and you had reached out and said something like, oh, I grew up in this area and I've never heard of this case. Like, make sure you post a link to the book. Because I had not posted a link to the book. I was just talking about the case and stuff, and I forgot to put a link to the book up there. And you sent me a DM and just reminded me to post links to the book and stuff. And it was shortly after that, I believe, that you mentioned that you had this the podcast, and asked if we would be interested in talking about the book on there.
That's Brian Santana, a listener and the co-author of the book Murder on Campus. This is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. I'm Jason Blair. This is a part of a discussion I recently had on the end of the year, the future, friends, family, and what gives us meaning. There's a lot of laughter and a lot of joy in this episode, and some tears. I hope you enjoy it. As we head toward the end of the year, I thought it would be nice to celebrate our 182nd and 183rd episodes with a group of listeners and guests, increasingly a crossover. These listeners and guests have been a part of the journey with us. I look at listeners as co-creators of this podcast, along with me, Alyssa Miller, our editor, Hannah Hill, the artist who designs most of our covers, and Jessica Olive Cash, who died earlier this year and did research for many of the episodes that you were able to listen to. You're the ones who inspire the guests I bring on the show. It's wild to think that last year's listeners episode was our 106th, and we've somehow added 76 cents. That's in part because there's so many good stories to tell, so many people whose voices deserve to be heard, and so many insights that we can learn together. Since we started in February of 2023, the show's been involved in terms of addressing topics that I would have never imagined, nor would I have imagined the relationships I've developed across the spectrum, from ministers and podcasters to the victims of crime and those whose loved ones have suffered. It's been a year where we've talked about addiction, cults, mysteries, the criminal justice system, religion, and more. One thing that I think binds me to our audience is curiosity. And I'm as curious about all of you as I am about any guest on the show. At its heart, As I reflect on the past few years, there's been tragedy and triumphs, low points in the valleys of life, and moments at the heights. But the one constant has been growth. No one has a perfect life, and everyone suffers. In fact, it's what in the deepest way unites us. But like Leo Tolstoy said, virtue begins only when there's effort. And one of those key elements to growing, I find, is listening. The lessons I've learned from my guests and my listeners have been paramount. So today, we're going to have some wonderful listeners on, some of whom have appeared on the podcast. In part one of this listener's episode, we're going to start with my friend, Allison Dickson, who's an author and the host of several podcasts. Brian Santana, an author and English professor. His brother, Cameron, who hosts his own podcast. Marie Holdridge, a longtime listener and friend who joined us last year. And Lauren Ater, a listener who had a blast with me at CrimeCon in Denver this year, along with Hannah. You know, they were responsible for quite the caper that if you want to know about, you may have to just come and join my table next year at CrimeCon. Maybe Lauren will tell you. In the second part of the episode, which will come out tomorrow, Marie and I are joined by Joelle Brunner, another listener, and we discuss our plans for the year and some of our favorite episodes. It's a wonderful group of human beings. First, I'm going to walk you through some of the stats for the year. We saw a 110% increase in listens between 2024 and 2025. Spotify provides the most accurate demographic data, but it's by no means inclusive of everyone. But the stats say our audience is 85.4% women, 10.1% men, and 4.5% that were not specified or non-binary. Our largest demographic groups were a virtual tie between 35-year-olds and 44-year-olds at 36.3%, and 45 to 59-year-olds at 36.4%. Our listeners came from all over the world. While 81% were from the United States, the top country, more than 5% came from the United Kingdom, and more than 4% came from Canada, and more than 3% came from Australia, with Sweden, New Zealand, Germany, Finland, Ireland, and Mexico rounding out the top 10. The top 10 states were California, then Texas, Indiana, Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, New York, Florida, Washington State, and Ohio. The top U.S. regions were Washington, D.C.'s metropolitan area, followed by the New York metropolitan area, Indianapolis, Dallas-Fort Worth, Chicago, Minneapolis-St. Paul, Portland, Los Angeles, Seattle-Tacoma, and Denver. The top cities across the world were Chicago, Portland, Melbourne, Australia, Indianapolis, Charlotte, North Carolina, Minneapolis, Denver, Leesburg, Virginia, and Dallas. Our most listened to episodes for the year took us from rural Appalachia in Kingsport, Tennessee, to the Blackfeet Reservation in Montana, to Mason City, Iowa, and Washington, D.C., and the Virginia Peninsula in Steele County, Minnesota. Those episodes were The Disappearance of Layla Santanello, Part 1, the top episode for the year. The episode explores the mysterious 2023 disappearance of Layla Santanello, and her mom, Jennifer, joined me to discuss the case and some of the inequities that we see in law enforcement and criminal justice. The next episode was The Unsolved Disappearance of Jodi Huisentruit, Part 1, with former television anchor Carolyn Lowe. The next one was From Delphi to Idaho to John Bonet, Law Enforcement Struggles to Cope with Modern-Day Crime, with former ATF agent Scott Thompson. True Crime's Fallen Star, Part 1, came next. It was with journalist and former true crime podcaster Billy Jensen. The next episode on the list was Part 2 of our discussion with Jennifer on Layla's case. and then the second episode with Carolyn on Jody's case. The next one in the lineup was Unraveling a Mystery, The Unsolved Disappearance of Dawn Holt, Part 1, with her daughter, Sam Holt, and her sister, Sherry Shelton. That was followed by Colonial Parkway Murders and Ripple Effects of Having Someone Stolen, with Bill Thomas, an advocate for victims of the Colonial Parkway murders in Virginia. Next was The Murder of Sabrina Schooner, with Terry Lynn Prestigard, her friend, a case in Minnesota that was resolved this year with the conviction of her ex-boyfriend. And finally, rounding out the top 10 was one of my favorite and most meaningful episodes, A Sister's Search for Hope, Peace, and Ashley Loring Heavy Runner, with Ashley's sister, Kimberly Loring. Today, we're going to discuss the year and the future, what brings people meaning, and what they get out of listening to other voices in a wide variety of topics, from community to friendship to family to perseverance. At the end of that second part, I will answer some questions that came in from listeners who were not able to make it to this recording. And so with that, let's do this. I wanted to just thank you guys for joining me. And, I was just telling you all before we started recording, the listeners episode is one of my favorite things to do over the years. This is the third one. And I wanted to go ahead and just get started by giving you guys a chance to share a little bit about yourselves, maybe how you found the podcast, and whatever you want about yourself. And I'm going to go ahead and start with, let's do Marie first.
Okay. So I'm Marie Holdridge. I live in North Central Texas. I love true crime, and I found your podcast. Started with the Murder Sheet because I was interested in Delphi, and then I found out the prosecutors through that, and then I found your podcast through the prosecutors. But you and I were also in a lot of chats together.
Mm-hmm.
There was some combat going on sometimes.
On occasion.
Yes. And Jason was always so kind to everybody and always just tried to, and I try to take the same approach too, try to calm the waters down a little bit because some of those folks are pretty radical.
Someone sent me yesterday. It was this cute picture. It was like this meme of Kermit staring against a window, and there was like rain on the window, and he was contemplating. And he's like, the more time I live on this planet, the more I began to believe that other planets use this planet as a lunatic asylum. And I try not to contribute to that, although occasionally I do. But yeah, it's really difficult, I think, Marie, to sort of balance sort of sticking to the truth, but also being kind about it. And that's kind of what my goal is. And, I had a very similar journey to podcasting. I think I found the Murder Sheet first during COVID, and that's when I first got introduced to podcasts, because I was, we were all anxious and we were all worried. So I would go on long walks, and one of my friends suggested podcasts. And one day I just wondered what happened to those girls who recorded. I was convinced that because the murder was recorded or the abduction was recorded, it would be over. And I found the Murder Sheet, and then the Murder Sheet appeared on the prosecutors. And that's how I found the broader community. And, when I first started the podcast, I thought I was going to focus on psychology, but then ended up in this true crime rabbit hole that I really enjoy, and I'm grateful for the people in it. So, Allison, you get to be my next victim.
Oh, no. Hello, everyone. I am Allison Dickson. I am, first and foremost, a friend of Jason Blair's, but we met through the prosecutors community a few years back.
You have to tell the story of how we met before we met.
Yeah, so I saw Jason in the circles, like in the live chats when there were recordings and things. And I was already familiar with Jason just by name recognition, because I was a person obsessed with news back in the 2000s. So, and so it took me a bit to go like, oh, that Jason Blair? Oh, cool. All right. This is interesting. So I like leaned forward and, um, was interested in your contributions. But then we met in person at CrimeCon in Orlando in 2022.
Yeah.
Was
Or three.
Yes. I those years always get
It's all
merged
vague.
in my brain. Um, and it was like an instant knowing. I always make this joke. I always do, like, I always share like a GIF of like, I see you, like our eyes like doing this, because it was like just this moment of like, he has a hustle about him that I admire. I like how he moves through the world. And I was like, and I knew at the time, I'm like, we need to keep an eye on some things. We need to keep an eye on some interesting people that might be causing trouble, So Jason just sort of became like my go-to guy for a lot of interpersonal things that, issues that would come up. And Marie, to your point, talking about uh, some of the drama or some of the combat that would happen. I mean, there was just always something going on behind the scenes. So Jason and I just really connected that way. I also met Marie through Jason. I know you were managing the reading selections for Silver Linings Handbook at the time whenever I
Yes.
came in. So
We should
yeah,
bring
it's
that back.
been an adventure, one adventure after another, being part of that community with you, but also you and I did podcasting together as well on my show, Vintage Villains and Ding Dong Darkness Time. Some of my fondest memories are doing our initial episode on werewolves. It was a Halloween episode, and
Oh,
Jason's
yeah.
because I had a guest originally lined up for that didn't work out, and so Jason came in and just riffed beautifully on the topic. And then we started talking true crime. We did um
Oh, Gone Girl,
yes,
too. The Gone
Gone
Girl
Girl. Yeah, the
episode.
story
People
of
love
Gone
that.
Girl. We talked about that on my show, and then we jumped over and did some true crime together. So yeah, the Lion Sisters
Oh,
case,
yeah. Yeah.
and then we
John
did,
Wilkes Booth.
yes, John Wilkes Booth, and ultimately my favorite. I think just we had such a blast. I had such a blast with you doing John Wilkes Booth. You brought so much content, like so much context to what I had, because I didn't have any of the geography really, and you know that area so well because you live there, and so you just brought so much extra texture, and then, we did Patty Cannon sort of, like, right
Oh,
after that,
yeah, right. Yeah,
um, the serial
the
killing slave
serial
trade.
killing slave trader from the Eastern Shore of Maryland.
Yes.
Fascinating story if you haven't heard it.
Yeah, and then we did Oklahoma Girl Scouts and the Snake
Oh, yeah.
River, killer, which I
Killer.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
so, I mean, you and I have just walked a lot of interesting, fascinating, stories together, and I would love to do it again. I've been out of the podcast game for this past year just for various life reasons, but I yearn to get back in, and,
Good.
because it's just an addictive format. I was telling you this the other day, how it is such an amazing way to share information, to learn, to collaborate. There's nothing like podcasting, and, love doing it with Jason, and I'm happy to be here that you invited me, so thank you.
Yeah, and you tapped into one of the real hidden things about podcasting is that, at least as a host and really as a listener, like, you have this ability to learn, whether you're doing the research or you're talking to people. It's really powerful. And yeah, basically, when Allison and I first met, I think we had talked in the chats, and you had said to Brett, "Is that?" Or you had said to Brett, "Is that Jason Blair?" And
Yeah, the Jason Blake.
the Jason Blair. Um, and I had actually quietly been in the chat for like months, but not saying anything because I am the Jason Blair. So, so that was funny. But also, like, we met at a CrimeCon and, in Orlando, and we had a brief conversation. And next thing I know, she's like, "All right, I need you to watch these people, this, and this." And I'm leaving. And I'm like, "You don't know if I'm a serial killer.
No, I read you. I mean, I just kind of feel like I just had that like radar going on in my brain. The way Jason walks through a crowd, he walks like a reporter. I don't know how else to describe it. You have a reporter's walk, and it's like leaning forward. You're like thinking we're like in it, and it's just you just want to know someone like that because you know that is someone that is actually viewing all aspects of the world. They're paying attention and they're like they're in something. It's just you had that vibe, and I was just like, yeah, I need to stay close to that guy. You know, so it really did. It worked out really well. Like I said, it's your friendship has just become such a meaningful thing for me throughout the years. So
Same to
yeah,
you.
so
Same to you.
it's great. I'm really glad I have my killer instinct, man.
um,
It
well,
served me
thank
well
you.
in this case.
I am grateful for it too because our friendship has been really wonderful over the years. Let's pick the next victim. I'm going to go with Cameron.
Yeah, so we met when we were promoting our book, A Murder on Campus, The Professor, the Cop, and North Carolina's Most Notorious Cold Case. And I'd honestly never listened to your show until I believe Nina reached out to us and asked if we wanted to come on. And I didn't know what to expect because, you listen and you hear something that's very polished and you get the email about making sure that you've got tea handy. And I was like, is this guy going to like cut us off at an hour? Like, how's this going to be? And I think we started that show at maybe 7 o'clock or 8. And I remember we didn't get off the phone till 11:30 or 12, because afterwards, you started going on to these rants about these other cases that were interesting, and I was like, "Wow, like, this is really cool. I can't believe that he took this much time." And then later on, I decided to start my own show, Santana True Crime, and actually, Brian reached out to me, my brother, and was like, "Hey, Jason said he wouldn't mind, coming on your show. You should reach out." And again, I didn't know if you were gonna be open to that because I know that you've got a large show and you're a very busy person. And we did Ashley, Lorena Heavy Runner together. And I found it just phenomenal that you not only knew the case, but you'd actually gone out there and met with these people and did the boots on the ground reporting aspect and the investigation. And I was and what was even more impressive was for me is that you made me feel very welcomed in this podcasting true crime community. And then, of course, we ended up, you came on the show, I think, what, 5 other times we started to do these.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We did Halloween episodes.
And we did like
We did
4 Halloween
Thanksgiving.
episodes.
Right.
Again, I didn't expect you to say yes to all those. I asked them to come on every single week to do these Halloween series.
It was
And I
great.
remember you told me just ask Nina. And what I found out was, okay, I can ask Nina anything. She's going to put it on his calendar. So yeah, you've came on, I think, 5 times after that, and you're coming on in December, whether you like it or not.
I didn't know that. See, I don't know that.
Yeah, yeah.
The woman tells me to show up somewhere, I show up. It doesn't matter. Maybe in the morning she'll let me know what I'm doing for the day, and I'm like, sure, great.
Well,
But I love joining other creators, and Allison knows this too. I love being on her podcast because I mean, one, I think, in mine, I'm really used to asking people questions and exploring things that they're interested in. But it's really interesting to be on the other side of it and have your brain picked a little bit because when people ask you questions, you think about things sometimes that you've never really thought of. And I mean, it's part of the reason why I like coaching, I like therapy, I like all these things because sometimes I really believe, like from my mental health work, like we don't offer people a lot of answers. All we're really doing is helping them find the answers inside them. And so I feel that way about being interviewed. So I love coming on. In Ashley's case, and Kimberly's, just grace and forgiveness and search for her sister. So powerful to me. How I became interested in, the plight of sort of missing and murdered Indigenous people is Brett and Alice from The Prosecutors did an episode on the Ashley Loring Heavy Runner. And it was right before, I think, that crime con where I met you, Allison. And that case just really, really stuck with me. And that, and then another prosecutor's listener who is Indigenous, or who is Indigenous. But the combination of those two things really led me to start to explore these cases. So I will come on your show, but the opportunity to talk about Ashley's case is just so, it's such a special opportunity for me because, over the last 3 years or so, that's been one of my sort of guiding lights and pursuits. And so, I will always take up the opportunity to advocate for those things. And I was really grateful that you gave me a chance to talk about it.
Yeah, and I'm grateful that you even brought that case to my attention. And I'm, grateful to be a small, tiny part of getting that case more attention. And I think that is what's special about all this is you said it really well, and I've ripped this off several times, is that people die twice. They've got their natural death and then the death when they're forgotten. And so it's important to keep these people's memories alive by talking about them and remembering them. And that's something that I've taken to heart and that I try to do in my podcast.
Yeah. Well, and then actually that's a great transition to Brian because you guys wrote the book Murder on Campus, which is about Virginia Olsen's murder. And she was a college student at the University of North Carolina, Asheville. What was that, 1973?
Right. Yeah.
I think she was murdered. It's a 52 plus year mystery. And, you think after the sort of family's moved on or the friends are getting older, what's the reason why, we still pursue these cases? And one of the things I think I've learned over the course of the last year is that there really is a balancing of the scales that happens when there is justice in a situation. And I don't mean justice always by the criminal justice system, but just when something just happens, it can never even out the scales. But just in talking to the people like Morgan Dana Harrington's parents, Jill and Dan Harrington, and talking to some of the people like Layla Santanella's mom, who's still searching for answers, there really is a balancing of the scales that happens for society too, when something just happens. So, Brian, you want to go next?
Yeah, I think when we actually met through X, and I like saying that because it's like I feel like that's the only good thing that's come out of being on X. I actually, Cameron can testify to this. Like, I only have got a smartphone in the last 2 years, and so what happened was I'm a college English professor, and my entire relationship to true crime was through books, and I was teaching a writing about true crime course for the last 6 years or so at the different universities I've been affiliated with. And my students were the ones that started turning me on to podcasts more and was like, no, people aren't reading true crime. They're listening to it. You need to listen to these podcasts. But I wasn't really actively involved in that, in kind of listening to what was going on with true crime with podcasts until we were getting ready to promote the book. And our publisher gave us a checklist. And one of the things on my checklist was they were like, you have to set up social media. They're like, you don't have any social media. I'd never been on social media before. And they said, you don't have any social media. You need an X account, an Instagram. I still haven't set up a Facebook. But I did set up, the X was for whatever reason, the first account I set up. And I remember I just started posting stuff and I didn't know what I was doing and just started posting stuff about the book and everything right when it was coming out, I believe. And you sent me a message that was on X. You reached out because I was posting, I think I had posted some pictures of Virginia Olsen, and you had the ties to, you were familiar with McLean High School, and you had reached out and said something like, oh, I grew up in this area and I've never heard of this case. Like, make sure you post a link to the book, because I had not posted a link to the book. I was just talking about the case and stuff. And I forgot to put a link to the book up there. And you'd sent me a DM and just remind me to post links to the book and stuff. And it was shortly after that, I believe, that you mentioned that you had this the podcast, and asked if we would be interested in talking about the book on there. And I went and I listened to, I think that close to, it wasn't all, but it was a lot of the episodes. I looked at it as like part of my research before I went on there. I listened to most of the episodes of your show before kind of going on. But that was our introduction. But my first thing, unlike Cameron, when you first messaged me, I had the same response that Allison did as well. I was like, Jason Blair. I was like, that's not a really coincidence. There's this other Jason Blair.
I've heard of him.
Your life ever been? Yeah. And so it was, and I was like, it could be the same person though. And I was like Googling around a little bit, and it was like, wow, that's what you're doing now. And so that's been that was like how we kind of met. And your podcast was like Cameron said, I felt like one of the early opportunities we had to talk about this show in long form. We did some really big shows. We did some really tiny shows. And it was like everything from shows that had 50 followers to a few 100,000. And we were just like, we wanted to talk about anyone who will listen to us talk about Virginia Olsen in this case. We would take that opportunity. But I remembered that one of the things that the biggest shows we did and the smallest shows had in common, it was very structured in the sense of like how much time we had, how everything was going to go. And we largely kind of stayed with that kind of that script, to the point that in some of the shows it almost felt like it was becoming, we had to consciously work to prevent it from becoming formulaic, because it felt like we had talked about the case in the same way, because people were they were in some cases kind of like dictating what they wanted that structure or story we were telling to be. And we had to sometimes push against that. And I felt like with your show, we had a lot of space to really talk in an extended way about the case that we had not had an opportunity to do up to that point.
Yeah, I tell people when I send over my show notes, hey, here's a framework to just get us thinking about something, because I know people have anxiety sometimes about coming on. Here's like a framework to think about. But ultimately, if we follow this framework, I'm telling your story and you're not really telling your story. So let's just get started and let it flow wherever it flows. So that leaves my CrimeCon partner in crime. For those of you guys who missed CrimeCon this year, you really did miss some experiences. Lauren?
I'm that anxious person.
Aren't we all on some level?
I'm a special kind of anxious. So I met Jason through all of my listening and to the prosecutors and the murder sheet. I think we probably started chatting, I don't know, participating in the chats or whatever.
Yep. I didn't know who you were. And then you started talking to me on Facebook Messenger under a different name. And I was like, wait a second, these are the same people?
and then you put it together.
Slowly.
But so we just kind of became friends randomly through listening and watching mostly things about Delphi.
Yeah.
And I met Jason when I went to CrimeCon this year, and he walked up next to me and I heard him talk and I gave him a big old hug. And now we're basically like best friends, right?
So why don't you tell the story about, do you want to tell a story about our CrimeCon table?
Yes. So
okay.
I had one of those, basic CrimeCon tickets because I'm not that cool. I don't have a podcast. Really not an important person. And Jason, after our big hug and meeting each other in person for the first time, he was like, are you going to go to the Clue Awards? And I was like, no. He was like, well, do you want to come to the Clue Awards? I have a table. You can come with me. I was like, yes. So it, super cool. I was not expecting to be able to do that. So I went to the Clue Awards and sat with Jason and Julia and who else was sitting? Hannah
Health.
Paige and
Paige.
Ryan and Mike.
Yep.
I kind of thought Mike would be here, but anyway, so we ate dinner and sat at the Clue Awards together, heckled everybody.
Yes, in fact.
And we started talking about those really cool lights that were the centerpieces on the table, and
they are so cool.
So cool. So yeah.
And so the long story short on this one is I make a comment about how we should really grab a Clue Award. I don't know whether it was for us or to give one to Alice LaCour, who they won the 2023 Creator of the Year Award, and Brett won't let her have the Clue Award. And I make some comment on it, and then all of a sudden on our table toward the end of the night, the Clue Award lighted sign that flashes just disappears. And I'm like, good Lord, guys, like when you take something like that, yeah, I can't take you anywhere. And when you guys take something like that, what you have to do is you have to take another one off of someone else's table and replace the one on our table with it. And Hannah's like, I already did that. And so Hannah took one, and Lauren had taken the one that Hannah had replaced on the table. Anyway, so that night...
I took mine from a different table.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Oh, yeah. And one of the staff people like saw me taking it, and I was like, you don't see this. Look away.
Yeah, it's so... And that, I love that part of it. You mentioned I think, was it Cameron, you mentioned the idea of going out and visiting Kimberly Loring and Ashley's family. I also, if you heard the episode with Haley Oniso, who is Ashley's friend, who started a forensic firm for reservations, also met her there. But then at places like CrimeCon, and Allison mentioned this, and Lauren mentioned it, it's so awesome to be able to connect with other creators and listeners. Because, yeah, it's just so, to me, it's so deep to meet people in person and extend the connection beyond that. So I wanted to, just throw something else out there for you guys to just give you a chance to maybe talk a little bit about sort of your year. This has been a tough year for a lot of people on a lot of levels. Whether it's something like the political landscape or natural disasters or just personal struggles, I think that part sticks out to me the most, that with all this wildness going on in the world, people are still carrying their own, personal struggles that we don't hear enough about. But I'm a big believer in the idea that one of the gifts, and you guys have all heard me talk about this ad nauseum, like losing my mom in 2023 or, other losses that have happened since that have been really hard. One of the amazing things, and I was telling somebody this yesterday, we were talking about like the long string of difficult things. And I was like, but yet I've never been happier in my life, because I think with suffering comes our greatest growth, and that they're good things that happen in life. But I also like to talk about the bad things because we learn so much through them. So I'm trying to figure out who I'm going to pick as my next victim for this one. I think I'm going to hand this one to Brian.
So about just like the challenges, you said?
Challenges, joys, anything you want to talk.
So I think there's been a lot of both this year. I mean, this has been a very transformative year for me in some ways. I felt like the kind of research and work we did on this case was really difficult. And I was very apprehensive when we were starting the kind of publicity for this about how this would work, because at least with books, you have about a 2 to 3 month period of very intense publicity, and then they kind of move on to their next project. At least the publishers do. And I think that one of the things that was a big challenge for me kind of early in the year was just this wrestling with this idea of just like kind of imposter syndrome of the way of like, what do you do with like, do I have a right to speak for this person that we've kind of written this book about? Particularly when when members of their family, since this happened, have never spoken about it. The ones who are still alive, at least now, and have refused to publicly speak about it, and no one is talking about it. And it was really just a lot of like, are we good spokespeople for this person? Do we have a right to speak for this person to begin with? And like, what can we do that's like kind of productive in that way? And I think at a certain point during the year, starting to kind of gain confidence and accustomed to doing that work. But I think one of the challenges for me now is the publicity for the book and stuff is done. It's been out a year now, and we're still out there but we're still out there doing the work on the case. And I think that one of the things that I've struggled to kind of juggle, at least in my mind, is the kind of business of true crime versus the kind of work that you do in terms of advocacy for a case. Because publishers will start asking you things about like, well, what's your next project, or you need to start thinking about this or that. And it's more than a book to us. The book was an extension of the work that we were doing, that we would be doing anyway. And I think that how do you kind of trying to juggle like feeling invested or feeling guilty about kind of devoting time and energy to something else that's not this case? How do you kind of continue the work that you're doing? Because I saw the book as the beginning and not the kind of end of the process for us, and continue to do that, but also kind of move on to do like other things as well. I think that's something that I still kind of juggle and struggle with, because I've had a kind of start and stop with other kinds of projects and attempted that, but I've had a very difficult time kind of getting into something that feels emotionally resonant with me, that I feel deeply invested in. I admire the work other people are doing, but I've had a difficult time kind of finding that thing that I can connect to. But recognizing at a certain point, there'll probably be other projects I want to devote attention to.
Yeah, it's probably like your heart and your mind telling you that there's still time to devote to Ginger's case. I feel that same feeling, Brian, often, like, and I can think of it acutely a couple times. Every time I do a case with a family related to an Indigenous person, when I did 3 episodes this year that dealt with Appalachia, like the challenges in rural white Appalachia, one was on opioids and 2 were on a disappearance. And then also, I think of the person you brought me, Clara S. Lewis, who wrote about Emily Weaver's case. And, I'll think, am I really the best spokesman for a conversation about what it's like to be a young woman, or what it's like to live in Appalachia? But one of the things that I think I've realized is sometimes if I walk in with true curiosity, the gap in my knowledge, the gap in my experience is what's going to help other people who have those same gaps get an idea about what something is like. I mean, and I think, Monty Frank, who's an Indigenous man whose daughter was murdered and was my first episode on that, he gave me great advice about when I went out and I visited them, about coming into the community with an open mind and setting aside your preconceived notions or biases. And I think this is true with every conversation or thing that we take on, that when you set those things aside and come in with an open mind, it can be so profound. And so just something to keep in the back of your mind.
Yeah. So, and that's one of the things I admire both about like people that are doing podcasts and also journalists that is always, and I even think about like with like law enforcement, with the stories cameras had about like, you have this like crazy thing that happens and then you're kind of on to the next thing. And I think that with me, my personality, it becomes very difficult. I get stuck very easily, and it becomes very difficult for me to kind of move on to that next thing, whatever it is. And so, but I also recognize that for the health of the people around me because they're over the case. But also some of Ginger's close friends as well. I mean, I've had experiences where some of their spouses have said, "Look, can you do us a favor and just kind of not have conversations, even if they reach out to you for a period of time, because it's really not good for them right
Hard
now.
for
They're having
them.
some health issues." And they'll never say that to you. And in fact, they might be reaching out to you to have a conversation, but try to put a little distance between yourself and them right now for their own good. And I think that sometimes, figuring out kind of what that balance is between feeling like you're kind of constantly doing some kind of work that's progressing or doing something productive with the case, but also kind of, not to the detriment of anyone around you, and also just finding a path forward to whatever that next thing will be. So
That's a hard one. Like I remember when I was like a kid, I would have been, I don't know, high school or middle school. There was a 9-year-old girl who got cancer and she died. And she was at our church, and we wrote about her in our, like, was I running like the church youth newsletter or something like that? And we wrote about her, several times. And I remember her mom coming to me like really kindly at one point and saying, "Hey, could you guys stop? Because as much as we appreciate it, it's become heavy for us." And since that happened, I've always had that as a journalist and as a podcaster in the back of my mind. I think of this with the Delphi case. Like, when is enough isn't always an easy call, and it's not at the same place for everyone. Marie, I'll throw it to you on your year.
Okay. All right. So this year has been eventful with some personal challenges or tragedies within my family. As I was mentioning before, when we were chatting before we started, um, we had to put down our French bulldog, but there's another part to that story. She suffered a spine injury, and my husband was scheduled for brain surgery like the end of March, and the dog incurred this injury, and literally we we did the surgery. We thought at first it was going to work, and then it didn't. And the dog just wasn't coping well with being paralyzed. She was very young, only 2 years old, and it was just heartbreaking. And so we literally ended up putting the dog down less than a week before my husband's surgery.
Mm.
And it was just so difficult just to watch. I mean, it was painful for me, but my husband is very introverted and he loves very strongly. And so it was horrible for him. And then going into that surgery, and then they thankfully the surgical procedure, rather than opening the head, they were able to go through the nose. But the big risk, about 60% of people get cerebral spinal fluid leak out of their nose and have to go back in. And we were in that 60%. So literally a week out, we had to go back, have another surgery, a longer hospital stay that time or whatever. But we're very, very thankful. It was benign. They assumed that or whatever. But that was just a lot this year for him, being very tired, post-surgical, et cetera. And then for me personally, beyond those things, I've gone through some personal growth this year that I really wasn't expecting, but sometimes those things come along and they need to happen, and it's kind of a double-edged sword. But the first thing was, and I won't give too much detail, but I grew up in an extremely dysfunctional home. My father was murdered when I was 3 years old, and my sister and I. Uh, I'm the oldest, she's the next one. Due to some family dynamics, we were rather estranged from each other. And a family member wrote a book that they're peddling around, and it's chock full of fiction and lies. And that book has spawned the family to come back together and talk, right? And so my sister and I have we are restoring our relationship, and it's such a blessing. I mean, to have that connection with a sibling. I had an 8-hour phone call with her the first time we actually started talking, and we just talked through a lot of our childhood stuff, et cetera. And I mean, it was just amazing for me. And so to just have that working within me now, and my sister and I communicating, and everything. I can't even describe the blessing that is. And then I will touch on another thing that I had personal growth on, and a little bit of a confession, which I publicly put out there. When Jessica died, I had a really bad view of her due to some of that combat that was going on in some of those chats years ago. And when Jason put her in a smaller group that I was in, I was like, because I've been busy with some other stuff, and I hadn't been in on a lot of the things going on in the true crime space, podcast groups or whatever. And so I was a little taken aback, and I thought, well, that's interesting, but I thought, this is the thing, Jason, you're safe. I know that you would never put people together in a situation unless it was safe. And so I thought, well, this is interesting. Well, within a day or two, then she was gone. And so then I started seeing all the tributes to her, and all the things that people talked about, how much she changed. And then I started reflecting on some recent chats with her, and in the prosecutor's podcast chats. And I realized that she had changed significantly from the chats that we had been in before. And that made me look at myself and say, wow, how judgmental. You didn't even give her a clean chance. You were all, you still considered her like she was 3 years ago instead of what she was now. And so on her tribute thing, I wrote about that because, I wanted people to understand from my perspective that I had changed. Her death changed me because it made me think about being judgmental about people as to who they were, not who they are.
Yeah. Oh, it's great to hear that story. I had seen your post and did wonder about a part of that. It's funny, before you even mentioned that, I was I was thinking about your sister, the story you were telling about your sister, and how sometimes really tragic or bad or hard things can lead to a lot of good. And that's the way that I viewed Jess's death. One of the legacies of her death was that it brought so many people who were at odds with each other back together. And, during some of those rocky times, she was like the one person who was interconnected between many of us who were warring with each other, and or just separated or distant from each other. And just to think that in her death, if she knew the good that she brought, which she does, that would be so amazing. So I was already going to make that point, but I was going to ask you the question of, what do you think causes people in those moments? Because in that moment where something bad happens, you sort of have a choice, and you have a choice to let that bad thing become something worse. Because I think for a lot of us in the situation with Jazz, people treated her very poorly. They didn't see the change. There are all sorts of different, and I mean, some people were just vile. I mean, to the point, it's just hard to even describe why you would treat another human like she was treated at different points. So way far from where you were, Marie.
Mm-hmm.
But you have a choice in those moments. You can make it worse, or you can try to mend. And I'm not even sure how that happens. But I was curious about, what do you think? What do you think leads to the fences being mended?
I think probably the biggest thing that we as humans need to do is look through what the old Native American thing, walk a mile in somebody's moccasins, right? Or stop a moment and think about them as a person. And it's easy to, when you're doing battle in chats and people are saying things that are pretty horrible, it's easy to take it personally. And I think that, personal growth for me would be to try to stop doing that. And, Jason, you are the peacemaker in those chats. You always come in with some kind of calming thing. You try to help people think, et cetera. And I value those skills because that's not me. I tend to be a little more reactionary. And then, although, I did in the chats try to take the high ground, but like if somebody attacked me personally, that was a little hard for me. And that's what she did at one point. And I'm like, whoa,
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that's that part, like thinking of family situations or situations dealing with, there's nothing special about me, Marie, in that regard. I just think that, having been through a scandal that, whether I created or not, which I did, but being in a scandal and being attacked from every direction. And I was telling a creator this recently she was being attacked, and the attacks turned into attacks on her appearance and other things like that. And I had said to her, one way to look at it, at least I have, is that a lot of the attacks that you get online, and sometimes in real life, as we say, people aren't really attacking you as a person. They're attacking an avatar of you that they've created in their head, whether it's based on your views or whatever it is. They're really attacking this made up version of you. And I think that it's just something to keep in mind when we get into these battles or we're frustrated by certain people or certain things. Allison, it's gotten deep, so I figured your turn next.
Marie, I've related to in my own way a lot of what you had said about your personal growth journey and the struggles that you faced and reconnecting with your sister. And in my own way, I've had a similar kind of trajectory this past year. Like, I look at 2024 as sort of my year of Icarus. Like, I was flying so close to the sun with so many different things in the podcasting community, my own projects and endeavors, and my own sort of need to untangle a lot of stuff in my head. I had sort of let go for a long time. So I started going to therapy, to sort of unpack a lot of things. And then 2025 happened or came, and things just kind of went insane on the global level, or whatever. And I felt myself sort of falling into a pit of despair over that, while trying to maintain this, spinning all these plates that I was spinning. And I suddenly just needed to, what I tend to do when things get like that is I tend to run as far as I can and like shut the door and go into isolation.
Allison and I joke about this. She runs away, I run toward.
Yeah.
There's like
The fight or flight. He's fight, I'm flight. If we're a superhero team,
right.
I don't know how effective we'd be together, but
I'm like, there's a problem. Oh, okay. I'm a moth to a flame.
And it's almost like a self-preservation mechanism for me, because I just sometimes feel like my head's gonna literally explode. And so I did a little bit of that. I shut the door on a lot of things, including, group chats and certain friendships, not ending friendships, but more just like, I'm just gently shutting a door in this case. You know where I'm at. I'm not hiding from the world. I'm going to be way over here. And in doing that, I sort of cocooned myself in my general surroundings. I started falling back in love with my home again. Things that I'd neglected for a number of years due to physical challenges, health challenges. I found that I was able to get back out in my yard again and start gardening. And it wasn't a lot of gardening. It was just a little manageable garden, a little like my pots, my hanging plants and things like that. I got a sun hat, and I was out there all day gardening with my sun hat. It was and I started reconnecting again more deeply with my mom, which has been really meaningful to me because, there's there's always been some complications and certain challenges, in that relationship, not, in a bad way, but COVID, I think, contributed a lot to our drifting. Just because like we spent a lot of time apart physically, due to pandemic stuff. And then that just became the habit and the ritual. We weren't spending as much time together. So we started getting together again and painting and doing art. Um, and that was stunningly therapeutic because I was doing things that I hadn't done before, like sculpting things from clay. And,
Oh, cool.
it was almost very meditative. And so we've been getting together every week and having our painting day on Monday. That's our Monday activity. So just even having those little things just sort of started to recenter me emotionally again. And I just felt grounded this year. I felt like I came back down to the ground and got acquainted with it. And then different opportunities started opening back up for me. I started writing again, which I had stopped doing
Nice.
also, because I am a writer by trade. And I would still make that claim even though I hadn't been writing. Um, so I wrote a book with a dear friend of mine this past year that we're still working on, but the first draft is done. Um, and then the death of Jessica, um, you know, it opened the door back open, or opened the door back open. You can tell I don't podcast as much as I used to. It opened the door. And found that those relationships that, because she and I had remained in contact while I was sort of often trying to heal myself. And she kept that, I called her a conduit between me and Jason and other people in that community. And when she died and reconnecting, especially with Jason, it it was both like the most horrible thing in the world just because of her, her loss, but it was also just wonderful to reconnect and remember her and the value and the contributions that she made. And Marie, again, I totally relate. My first meetings with Jessica, and I mentioned this on our tribute episode that we did on Ellie and hers podcast version of events, that, our first meeting was hostile because, she was going through some things. I didn't know her at all. She was just very
She
brash.
had some opinions.
Yeah, and the thing is, I'm often the same way. I can come off very much like that too online. And so she and I coming together, it was just like sparks, two pieces of metal just crashing together. But eventually it softened because I got to know her a little better and knew her struggles. There were struggles and things that I deeply related to. And so I loved her like a sister. And but anyway, not to get too much off onto that track, but that horrible event, you know, it allowed me to open that door back up in a way that felt good and like it was meant in some ways because I knew that door wasn't going to be closed forever, but I was struggling with how to open it back up again.
It's really interesting you say that because I know that the whole thing about like running away versus running toward battle, like one is looked at as very courageous or whatever, right? But the reality is they're really just coping mechanisms. Like the way that I learned to protect myself when I was afraid was to like fight or insert myself into situations. And pulling away to me is just another coping mechanism. But you made me think of something very true because one thing 2024 taught me that prepared me for your cocooning was for the first time in my life, people ran away and I let them.
Yeah.
And I feel like when you needed time, you didn't directly say it, but like the hints were there. When you needed time, it was really easy for me, at least one of your close friends, to say, like, if this is what she needs, let her have it. Like, it might hurt. It might be sad for us. It may never come back together, but let people. And I feel like that's really something I've learned over the last 2 years, too. So we'll have to thank certain people for setting me up for this one. But I really think, it's all about what's right for you and what's healthy for you in a moment. I'm glad it worked out, or it has worked out so well, because that just screams to me that's what was supposed to happen.
Yeah, and I will say, I don't want anybody else. I have a very dark sense of humor, and I don't let it out too much in polite company. But I sort of made this joke to Jessica. I'm like, if you wanted us to get back together again, we could have just done a Zoom or something, and
Right. No need to be so dramatic.
yeah, and I could just hear her laughing about that. But I will think back on when I'm thinking about this year, because this year will never leave my brain. It's one of those that just left a deep dent in my head. And I will think though about how that horrible tragedy did, and as to your point, Jason, it things do tend to. It's sort of like whenever you look at a volcanic eruption and then you look at the landscape around it a couple of years later and you see flowers growing from the ash. It's a bit like that. And so that's how I'll try to frame it,
Yeah, no, I think that's a great metaphor. It made me think of, my friend who was struggling with cancer, who came into my life, and if a bad thing had not happened, we would have never connected. And she had sent
Right.
me a note a couple days ago that just said something along the lines of, "You've been the most meaningful thing that ever happened in my life." And if something really bad hadn't happened before, we would have never met. And
Right.
I, you know, Morgan Dana Harrington's mom, Jill, in the episode with her, and I'm not going to say it as eloquently as she did, she said, like, sometimes she looks on her mantle and she thinks, all I have are these ashes. Like when, someone else's kid is getting married or they're graduating from something. And she said, but what do you have when you have ashes? If you put a little water, you have clay. And once you have clay, you can build something. And I just thought that was one of the most profound things I heard this year, that we really do build from the ashes.
You do. That's very well put.
Gotta credit her. Gotta credit her. So Lauren, do you want to be the next victim, and then Cameron can go next? Tell me about your year and your lessons from the year.
So I have had a pretty challenging year. I had some just personal relationships that some unfortunate events occurred. I also got really sick with the flu. I had to put one of my dogs down while I was sick with the flu. And just kind of, I spent a lot of the year, I think, I don't know, not feeling sorry for myself, but it was just a sad year, I feel like. But I am proud of myself for kind of trying to get out of my bubble and going to CrimeCon. That was a big deal for me because I went by myself, and I'm glad that I did that. Of course, Jason, you made it much better. And I think,
hey, if I'm there, you're never alone.
So I'm really proud of myself that for doing that and being able to kind of put myself in that situation that was really uncomfortable for me. So I think for the coming year, I hope I can continue to kind of challenge myself in that kind of way and put myself out there more and continue to just grow personally and learn to be more comfortable with myself, and we'll see where it goes.
And I think, by the way, just so it's a struggle for all of us, right? Being comfortable with ourselves. I think everybody does battle with that one. And, I just remind myself when I'm going through big growth periods, like the one that sounds like you're going through, that it's peaks and valleys. So when I was first psychiatrically hospitalized, my favorite part was being able to talk to a psychiatrist who was really smart, like 3 or 4 times a week. And then, the food wasn't bad. But art therapy. And in art therapy, they asked us paint recovery. And I painted mountains, and I wasn't exactly sure. Mountains with flowers on them at different points, and trees in both the valleys and atop the mountains. And the therapist asked me, well, what does this mean for you? Well, growth is just peaks and valleys for me, that it's not a linear line. We go up and down, and that there are beautiful flowers in the valleys and on the sides of the mountains and not just the peaks. And I just like to remind myself, like, sometimes I'm going to be really good at this and then I'm going to slip back, but there's still beauty to be found all throughout it. So anyway, I'm proud of you.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Cameron?
Yeah, so this has been a really interesting year for me. I've been fighting this transition of leaving law enforcement. And for those that obviously don't know, I spent 16 and a half years with the Raleigh Police Department. After I left, because I had a daughter with my second wife and now wife, that they couldn't figure out why she couldn't breathe when she was born. And we ended up spending 98 days at Duke Children's Hospital and leaving with a trach and a G tube and coming back with a bunch of medical equipment in our house. And then on top of that, that was in 2018. So you've got to deal with COVID, and you're dealing with COVID and someone with a trach, which just magnifies things even worse.
Right.
And then the riots happen, and our department had 2 officer-involved shootings. So I pretty much did not have a schedule at that point. We were just going from one planned riot to another, or sitting in a parking deck waiting for a riot. And that was not conducive to family life, believe it or not. Yeah.
Really?
And I'd already been divorced once. So, like, with police officers in the military, you're allowed a starter wife. So, the first one I can kind of like write off. It's like,
Are
all
you
right,
the one who told me
made a
the
mistake.
story?
Yeah.
Are you the one who told me the story about how you came into the station bummed about being divorced, and then one of the guys said, well, you're a real cop now?
Yeah. My sergeant at the time said, oh, well, now you're a real cop. And then my captain, and this is absolutely true, he's on wife number 5.
Oh, wow.
And so, yeah. So I was like, I'm not doing this more than twice. But so my wife and I were having this conversation, and I was not sleeping because I had to wake up and help my daughter. And I decided to step away from full-time law enforcement. I went part-time with a department nearby. And then my brother and I wrote this book, A Murder on Campus, the professor, the cop in North Carolina's most notorious cold case. And the reason why I say that is not to plug it, but even in the title, I'm identifying myself as a cop. And that's what I've done throughout my entire adult life is I am, the cop. Even my neighbors' kids, they call me Police Officer Cameron, even today. And what was really hard about it for me is when I started the podcast, is that was something that I was enjoying doing, and especially meeting new people and the challenge of learning new skills. But I was still holding on to that cop thing, and I didn't want to let go. And I didn't know if that was just the insecurity of not knowing if I would be able to do this well enough, or if this was something that I was just so accustomed to doing for, close to 2 decades. And I finally decided in July of this year to give up my certification and try to force myself to not have this plan B or the safety net. And I found that it, it's worked out so far, and it's nerve-wracking sometimes, especially when an episode just goes to crap. those episodes that you're like, you work so hard and then it gets like 10 views and you're like, and then like you were saying, I think before the recording is you've got some, they're like, wow, this was an absolute piece of crap and people like it. And there's no real rhyme and reason. And so what I've tried to do is, you actually told me this, is just to enjoy it, not look at your numbers, which I do all the time anyway. I've
Don't worry.
not taken your advice on that yet. I've
Well,
tried.
it took me a lot longer to take my own advice on that than, I realized it. And then like a year later, I stopped looking at the numbers. So occasionally I'll pop them up and be like, wow, that's weird. I would have never guessed that episode. Okay.
Yeah,
But it took me a while.
and that's the fun part about it for me too, though, is cases like Yuba County that I did a case on with Tony Wright, who wrote a book called Things Aren't Right. And, it's about the Yuba County Five. And what I didn't even know, because I don't watch a lot of TV now, is that Netflix did a documentary on it. And so I started getting all these comments and the views just shot up through the roof. And things like that, it, it's rewarding to get that little pat on the back that people enjoy listening to that show. Um, and so for me, I'm in my 40s and I feel like I'm starting a new job or a new career. I am, but it's a very unique spot for me to be in.
And I think that's like a big struggle. Like when people leave the military, it's very obvious when they leave law enforcement, but also when people retire
Right.
or stop working, they become unemployed. We tie so much of our identity to what we do, right? And it's so easy to explain what we do, but who we are is a much more accurate and consistent thing about us. And I think really being who you are and being authentic to yourself, assuming you're not a serial killer or looking to harm people, being authentic to yourself, and really living who you are is more important than what you do, if that makes sense. And living who you
Yeah.
want to be. Yeah.
Right. And the living who I want to be is what I'm striving for right now. Podcasting is a very competitive field, and so is book writing. And Brian and I got into both of those. Like, the odds are definitely against you that you're going to be successful. I think, if you look at the math on it, it's like 90% of the podcasts have less than 1,000 subscribers. And I think it's like 6% is monetized. And the same thing with books. It's like 168 million Kindle books are out there, and only, I believe it's the top 10% sell more than 1,000 copies or something, right? So it's like if you sell more than 1,000 copies, which our book luckily did, it's like, something to be proud of. That it's not going to be a New York Times bestseller, but for me personally, that's how many people have written a book.
Yeah. Just accomplishing the actual act of doing it. It's interesting because I think the answer, or at least part of the answer maybe, and I don't just apply it to your situation, redefining what you consider success, because
Right.
sometimes success is accomplishing something for yourself. Like sometimes success, like for you guys, even if you sold a handful of copies of the book, you've at least forced attention and
Right.
action related to the case. And that there are, I guess, a lot of ways to have success. And, I think we as society tend to label it in these like ambitious or monetary reasons. But I hate to pull my I'm not going to pull my psychology hat on, but my motivational theory hat. There are actually 22 different motivators, right? Recognition's one of them. Power's one of them. Commerce is one of them. We tend to measure each other by those, but progress, diversity is one. and autonomy. And then tradition is another one. And then, security and risk taking and altruism and affiliation and connection between people. These are all, legitimate ways and values that you can measure success. Now, if I were to put one on top of it, I would say affiliation is probably the most important one, because we as humans would have all been taken away by lions and hyenas if we couldn't form effective groups. And so when you can contribute to community and you can contribute to society, you're offering greater riches than can ever be grabbed by money. So when I think of something like your book, and I think of a lot of the accomplishments you guys have, like, you're contributing to our society and our community in ways that can't be measured by the standard ways that we tend to measure ourselves. In Jason's speech here. Right. Well, I was going to ask you guys about episodes you liked or disliked. I have my list of episodes I disliked, which would be out of the 76 episodes, like 75 of them. No, not really. But I want to just ask not so much about what you liked or disliked, but if there's anything that sort of stuck out from you, or any messages from guests, or any things that rammed for you. One hidden, I always find, and Marie and I talked about this last year, they're like hidden themes that run throughout my episodes, because I just go with my curiosity and they keep on coming up. And I think 2024, definitely loss was a big one, and how suffering unites us. And I was working on my end of the year episode and sort of like pulling together, not even pulling together the threads, but I was just noticing as I was going through it, there are all these threads that are popping up for me, that kind of connect different things. And I think you can sum part of it up by what happened to me at CrimeCon. While I was at CrimeCon, there was a listener that was looking for me. Couldn't find me, found a bunch of podcasters. They kept on trying to direct them to me. And what she said was that when she listens to the episodes and she hears me talking about like vulnerability, or, my struggles, or things that are really difficult for me to wrap my head around, it gives her a sense of strength, because if you're struggling with this, and another person is struggling with this, and your guests are struggling with this, then I can struggle through it. And I feel like for me, that was one of the themes of this year, was not just sort of like the suffering, but the other side, how people kind of push through it. So that was one of the themes I picked up from the year. And, I can tell you what, the Jill Harrington's quote about the ashes was probably the moment for me, that just sort of took me back. And there've been many episodes where I've like bawled in tears afterwards, but, I think that was a super profound one for me. So just whatever thoughts you guys have on anything.
Well, I want to make a thought, just as somebody who ran away from the community but was watching from afar, or I still get your notifications when you have an episode go up, even when we weren't talking. And I just kept noting to myself, it's funny how you said that. You keep pushing through, because that is quite literally the feeling that I would get watching your episodes go up.
Huh.
Like, he is killing it. You are like, you keep bringing it. And then I saw you did the Love Has Won cult.
Cult, yeah.
You're even going into cult. I mean, it was just, I was like, Jason is, because when we were talking last, I think it was in January or February, you were getting things together, with your show, and you were getting, more sponsorships, and, joining, I can't even remember the word for it anymore, like a network or something along those lines. And I was like, you're growing it, you're building it, awesome, keep going. And then I would just watch your episodes come out, and I was like, look at him, I was so proud of you. I was just, seriously, I'm like, you're everything. create. And that's funny that leaves me with actually a quote from a very good friend of mine, Clarence Young, who is a fantastic author, who made a little button for me, or he made little buttons and he gave me one at one of my book events that he visited. And it said, despite everything, create. And
Mm,
I look at
yeah.
that all the time, and that's always a good reminder to me, and that's what you were doing. And
Mm.
I couldn't be prouder and more excited to see where you continue to go.
Oh, that's so cool. You know, and it's a funny thing too, Allison. You say whatever you do, create. You know, there are going to be people who are listening to this right now who are going to say, "But I'm not creative." And one of the things I've learned is that people are way more creative than they think. They think of like art, or they think of writing, or they think of that. But like your creativity may come in the garden, or your creativity may come in organization or
Right.
process or whatever it is. But yes, like there's something about bringing things in the world that
Yeah.
is just so powerful. I
Yeah.
love that one. Marie, you?
Well, so Jason, before I speak to anything else, I've been sitting here and I might have had a TIA. I don't know if y'all know what that is, my background healthcare. But I don't think we heard from Brian about his year. Did I
Oh,
miss it?
did we? Did
Uh,
we hear about your year?
no, I
Yeah, he
spoke
was
about my
talking about how to get his finding the
Oh,
next
yes,
passion
yes,
project.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
then,
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
obviously having a senior moment, but I was sitting here and I'm going, I don't think I heard about his.
And I gotta say
My
too,
bad.
to that point with Brian, like your struggle in that regard, I feel you, man. I'm the queen of a deep dive. Like I find something, I hyperfixate on it, and I go nuts. Just
No,
recently,
no.
Nazi. I was telling Jason, I'm like, I finally done the deep dive on Heinrich Himmler and all these guys,
Yeah.
and it's just like, how do I find something else now? And then like, so I completely relate to your struggle to find that thing that grabs you by the soul and like yanks you in and keeps you with it. And I wish you luck in finding that passion, that next passion project. So
Well, I appreciate that, and I think that's what that deep dive is one of the things that I really appreciated about some of the shows this year. The Jennifer Santanello show that you did with about the disappearance of Layla.
Mhm.
That was my favorite show of the year that you did, but at least part of that by far, and I think at least part of that was I think it's almost a cliche now when true crime, people in the true crime community will talk about like, giving attention to smaller cases. But giving attention to smaller cases isn't about just like acknowledging that this case happened or like devoting a 2-episode deep dive into the really messy circumstances of Appalachia and these people's lives that are incredibly complicated. It wasn't an episode, if you were just describing the kind of victim and those involved, that would appear on the surface to look sexy or interesting to anyone else. And I thought that the amount of time and care that you devoted to that episode was, that's to me like what like true crime actually looks like, and it's like ideal form. It's not about the most exotic case that has come there. It's not about collecting cases that are kind of that are emerging just like regionally, but taking these people. The crime that you covered in there is something that coming from West Virginia for a decade. It is many of my students who were raised by grandparents and had people in their family that were from the same circumstances. It looked very familiar. And the idea that you could do a deep dive on a case like that wouldn't normally get attention, but in doing so, kind of talk about spaces and people that that wouldn't necessarily that are flying under the radar of society in so many different ways. I thought that was just so powerful, and it is very life affirming to me. And that's one of the things I always tell my students. I've always find true crime very life affirming because that ability to kind of to not only say that what happened to this person mattered, but that this person's life and their circumstances matter, and you should really care about them.
And the
Uh,
people who
yeah.
like them that we haven't even
Right.
heard of.
Yeah.
And that because of that show, and I think about this all the time with Virginia Olsen as well, but because of that show, like I had never heard of Kingsport, Tennessee. I had never heard of Layla's case. I know about like her family. I know about this town. I know about the circumstances that were there. And it felt very familiar to what many of my students were going through at the time. And so, and I use that episode in class actually with them. But but I think about just the power of this genre to take these cases that feel like very immediate in focus and very small in impact, and to remind us that not only about just like making us more just empathetic and caring people just in general, because I think that does spill over. We kind of think about and maybe give people the benefit of the doubt of just how complicated people's lives are, but that these cases that are not getting a lot of attention, that like we know about these, like so many people know about Layla right now that never would have before. And that's something that I have a hard time kind of fully wrapping my mind around all the time. It always surprises me and always moves me every time that if not for like a show like that episode done, like there's a lot of people who just don't know about that case. People that would care and that could care that just don't have it there. And I think the ability to do that is so powerful to me.
It's interesting because I so appreciated Jennifer, Layla's mom's willingness to be so vulnerable and open. But I think I told you this. I was convinced after recording that episode, and we recorded like for 3 hours for the 2 episodes. I was convinced, I was like, no one is going to care about this. No one is going to, not no one's going to listen. But, I had said, I had said to someone, and it was actually Jessica who helped me do a little research on it before. I had said, I don't think anyone's going to listen to this one, but I'm going to keep on doing it. And I'm going to keep on doing it every time. We say if we do an episode on Indigenous people, we lose like 20% of our downloads, 20-30% of our downloads. And I'm like, and that's why I'm going to keep on doing it and keep on doing it. And it ended up being one of the most listened to episodes. The case got picked up by some people. Nancy Grace did something on it afterwards, which was really cool. And, I think, the police department in Kingsport, to me, have been trying really hard on that case. But I think the real outcome of that is just shining the light on the struggles of a part of this country that runs from, West Virginia to Alabama that we really don't pay attention to often. And that has been dealing with lots of challenges, and there's lots of suffering in it that, to me, in some manners is needless because we have solutions.
So, Jason, I am going to dive back in real quick.
Okay.
I have like favorite general episodes that you do, but one recent one that I really had an appreciation for a couple of components was the discussion that you had with the guy about the Gilgo Beach murders and the mapping.
Wow.
And his passion, first component, his passion for those murdered women, for the media to stop constantly referring to them with their mugshot pictures and the word prostitute, or sex worker or whatever. And that resonated. I mean, why do we have to put such bad labels? I mean, it is what it is as far as what they did, but these are victims and they should be treated with more honor and respect than what's being done. Maybe it doesn't sell as many newspapers or, shows or whatever, but the other component of that, and this is a common theme that I see through the episodes that you do, you probably have a gamut of guests that are really easy to talk to and it just flows. And then other ones where maybe it's a little bit more challenging, but I love your skill of being able to pull things out of people and keep steering the conversation in kindness. I mean, I see an overtone of kindness and respect, but also that ability to adjust and go with what they're doing and keep trying to pull, more information out of them. But at the highest level, my absolute favorite episodes you do are the ones with Julia Cowley, the ones with Brett, the ones with Anya and Kevin, those, because you guys collaborate. you have a common theme of integrity within this true crime community. And I so appreciate that, but I just love it when you guys get it. It's like the creativity and just the content and everything you guys are saying is just like top notch, I think, when you're doing that.
Yeah, and
that's great.
I've got to chime in there. The episode with Julia Cali when they were talking about motives and Brian Koberger, and Jason was started to say when he was a reporter, like he would put him in these 4 different
The
categories.
holy trinity of
Yes,
murder.
the Holy Trinity. Yes. That was so good that I was like, all right, I've got to write this shit down. Because, you know,
Yeah, we
I
had
have
two
to feel this.
we had 2 holy trinities. Mine were drugs, money, and relationships, and Julia's were, what was it? Sexually motivated,
Right.
personal cause, and financially motivated.
Yeah. I really
You know,
appreciated that, and of how you can talk about anything. And I can prove that by you went down a rabbit hole with Brett about it started off, I think, with literature and folklore, and then it
oh.
somehow went into comic books. But I was thinking about this today. I was like, you've got an episode where you've got all that and you're discussing Supreme Court cases. And if you looked at that from the outside, like if you made a YouTube thumbnail about that, like, you know, a comic book character and a Supreme Court justice and like Frankenstein on the same thing, there'd be no relation
People would
at
be
all.
very
But
confused.
yeah, you find a way to kind of tie this all into a show, and that's very impressive.
It's always easy whenever Brett is on because, you know, there's a script, there's whatever, and then we just have a normal conversation like we were sitting down together having a conversation. But yeah, I felt like those episodes with Brett in October for me. And then the episode with Julia, that was what I would call the accidental episode. We didn't tend to record it, but we started talking about the survivors and we started talking about like finding ways to reach sort of kindness in this space and not just toward each other who are in the space, but also to the survivors and other people like that. But the thing about talking to Brett is that there's just so much wisdom in having conversations about, and Allison, you get this part too as somebody coming from the horror genre, that things that we view as entertainment, you know, whether it's horror or it's folklore or it's true crime, are really like lessons. And there was this quote Brett had in our episode, one of our episodes on the monsters we make, which he said, the real monsters come out when we don't listen to the fake ones. And I thought, wow, you're right. And, you know, I think one of the threads of talking about all these different things, whether it's the Love is One cult or, you know, the prescription pill problem in Appalachia, is like listen and learn from these lessons so you don't have to live them.
Yeah. Yeah, I had some really great episodes with Brett on different types of folklore. We did a zombie episode a couple years ago.
yeah.
We did
That's a good one.
which was really also like similar to my discussion with you about werewolves. It was, you know, it started out talking about sort of the popular culture aspects, some of the deeper folklore aspects, but it became also sort of a metaphor. I think we started talking about a metaphor for how we change
Yes,
ourselves or
shapeshifters, right?
right.
Yep.
And with the zombie episode that we did, it ended up becoming about, you know, learning about how the origins of those from the slaves in the Caribbean, and how those that folklore sort of grew and then moved over here, and how it reflected our societal fears about the other and whatnot. And it ended up becoming a very unexpectedly very deep discussion, whereas we could have just been talking about eating brains the whole episode if we wanted to. So I really appreciate being able to have discussions with people that have like an interest in a topic, but can see like sort of, below that surface and really dig deep under it, and even under something very that you would think would be lighthearted or casual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I talked about this on your show, Cameron, but and your timing of their October episode was right when I recorded with Brett on the monsters. And then I think the prosecutors did an episode on the Wendigo too. But, like some of these legends, like the legend of the Wendigo, and Brett and I just happened to be researching it at the exact same time. And you think of something like that, and to your point, Allison, you could just make a monster out of it. But then thinking about like, why is there this cannibalistic monster in the Algonquin legend? Well, it comes back to this idea of don't be greedy or the Wendigo is going to come and get you, or
Right.
don't, and he told this story of how the Ojibwe, there's this Ojibwe story of how they give their children a piece of coal and a piece of food. And the ones who reach for the food are admonished. And the idea is the coal you can use to warm and build something for your community. And I think like a lot of these stories, whether they're true crime or they're stories like this, they're really, I think the most profound things you can learn from them is what you can do for your collective community. And I just love that part of it. Who wants to jump in next? Aaron, Lauren hasn't gone, right?
I honestly, everybody's pretty much covered what I had planned to say already, but I really enjoy the episodes that you do with Julia. Like she is just the coolest person to me.
Yeah.
I just love the perspective that she has to bring to a lot of the cases that we're all interested in. And I think that you've done a good job covering those stories like in a more respectful and just a more interesting way than what than a lot of the content that's out there, the way that other people try to present the information. I just feel like it's a much more meaningful way to think about things and digest the information.
Good. That's sweet. Because that's kind of my goal. That is my whole goal. There are lots of ways that, as the others here will tell you, who are podcasters, there are lots of ways you can get downloads. It's not a particularly hard formula to get attention, but a lot of it, I feel like Brett and Alice have a thoughtful podcast. Kevin and Anya have a thoughtful podcast, but it's not usually those that get big. It's actually the more surface, superficial ones that get big. And I've always felt for me, like I will easily trade what you're talking about there, Lauren, that ability to sort of like be thoughtful and be compassionate. And what you were talking about, Marie, about like, not describing the victims of the Long Island serial killer just as sex workers, but they were like mothers and sisters, and they worked in jobs, and they, all of those things. I will gladly trade whatever. I would trade anything for that, because it's what gives me meaning to be able to be thoughtful and be kind and compassionate. So before we close, I wanted to ask you guys about the next year, which I'm pretty sure is 2026, but I'm not entirely sure. But we're moving at warp speed lately. We might be rolling right into 2027. But I wanted to ask you just what you guys are thinking about for your new year. I'm personally looking forward to continuing. When my mom died back in October of 2023, a month before, I had a trip scheduled actually to go out to Idaho, which related to the Lewis Clark Valley serial killer case, and also seeing the whole area. And I accidentally ended up seeing all the sites of the University of Idaho killer. But she had gotten sick about a month before she died, and she'd gone into the hospital, and I was there, and I was like, Mom, I think I should really stay. And she said to me, Jason, go live your life. So I have nonstop since then been on planes, any and everywhere, you can possibly imagine, from, I don't know, Minnesota to Montana to Arizona to Vermont to, just nonstop movement. And so that's what I'm looking forward to. Probably the big trip for next year is I'm taking 16 days around Lake Superior. So I'm going to go to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan and Mackinac Island, and I'm going to actually take seaplanes and boats
You
around
must talk to me about this. That's
Thunder
my
Bay,
first family
Canada.
member lives in that region, so I'm so excited.
Going to Duluth. Oh yeah, yeah. Come join me for a few days.
Okay.
I'm gonna seriously, really. I'm gonna be all around. I am flying into, I think, the Upper Peninsula and then all around through Canada and back down. And I'm
Beautiful.
looking forward to that because I love things that are beautiful. Lake Superior is definitely one of those beautiful things. And the rock formations, the water, all of that stuff.
Oh,
But it's so rich in culture and history. And to Brian's point about like being able to go into places that, you may not relate to, but there are stories and there are lessons and they're powerful things. So I'm looking forward to my Upper Great Lakes version of that. So now I actually have to commit to it now that I've said it.
well, now that I know you're going,
I already have tickets.
meet you on the shore.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
I mean, I'll take it since I've been yapping anyway.
Okay.
I don't really have a whole lot of huge plans. I've been talking about resurrecting one of my podcasts. My friend Josh and I have been bantering about having a movie podcast for a long time that we
Oh,
might.
cool.
We've done a lot of movie episodes together on my show Ding Dong Darkness Time. He's such a great he can riff so well on movies. He has so much knowledge that I don't have, but he's so great to talk to. Um but I did have my book that I was talking about earlier. My friend and I have written. It's supposed to be part of a series, so it's this sort of vigilante crime series that we've been working on, and it's been a great escape because it's not normally what I typically write.
Mm.
So it's been a nice opportunity to expand my horizons there. So we'll continue working on that, and I don't know, man. I think in a lot of ways, I've been trying very hard not to take on too much and just, not get myself too overwhelmed because I do tend to take on too many things at once and then I get overwhelmed and then I shut down. So I'm really pacing myself and I'm hoping to just learn more new skills and learn more about history and, whatever. I'm just sort of like a wanderer, a traveler. So
Hey, it's a
yeah.
great way to go.
We'll
It's
see
a
what
great way to go.
happens, but I'm happy to be here, so
So, Allison, I was talking to a client this weekend. It was really interesting. He was talking about his plans and a concern he had. He was holding off on doing certain things until other things happen. And one of the things that I've really learned over time, the best laid plans never really land entirely. But the best plan you can have is to look at one thing you want every day and grab it. That might be a teddy bear. It might be a bag of gummy bears. It might be something. But
yeah.
that's like the best laid plan is to grab one thing for yourself every day.
Yes.
Oh, shoot.
I love that.
Who wants to go next? Marie, back to you.
I'm okay with that if y'all are.
Okay.
So, Allison, I also, like you, are looking to acquiring new skills. Studies on human brains, which I've evidenced that mine isn't working as good as it was earlier. And when you learn something totally new, then that creates new pathways in your brain. And so, it helps your cognitive abilities to stay better. And so, the fun thing that I'm going to do this year is go to CrimeCon. I've never gone. And a friend is going with me, and I literally was in the hospital on a recovery bed typing in to get my platinum tickets, for my friend and myself. And we didn't get the discounted rate, but we did get them before they sold out. And so I was consulting with Jason, is it really worth it? Whatever. Anyway, and so I got those, and I'm so excited. And the reason that this works is my husband loves Vegas, and so he would never go to CrimeCon because he's such an introvert. He hates crowds. He doesn't like to be packed in with a bunch of people, but he will 100% go to Vegas and play. And then her husband isn't a big fan of Vegas, but he will go just because, and they're going to, he's going to go do some things too. And my husband and he get along real well. Anyway, so I'm super excited about that. And I definitely want to learn from y'all that are veterans about what to do, what to plan for, etc.
Well,
And
first of
then,
all, you need to
yeah.
come join my table.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, and like I have Anya and Kevin's book, and I intend to get them to sign it. I'm waiting till the price drops again a little bit on Gilbert King's book, because if he's there, I wanted to get him to sign it. But anyway, but then the other thing that we're taking on this year, and I don't know, I amaze myself sometimes because I probably took on too big of an enterprise. I am retired, and my husband has a trade that he does, and our business has done well. We've been blessed. But in the industry that my husband is in, the couple that have the International Trade Journal, as well as world competition for the trade that my husband is in, they are older, probably about 10, 12 years older than us, and they're just tired. And so they were trying to sell it. Nobody else stepped up.
So as we look towards 2026, I've just been thinking about, like over the past week, getting ready for this show, all the things that have happened in the previous year. And 1 year ago, we were getting ready for the publication of our book, and we were in the midst of a flurry of activities. And one of the things, and I mentioned this story because one of the things that as we were getting ready to start 2025 that I ended up discovering was just the generosity and community in the larger true crime community that I just didn't expect. Cameron and I were really focused in a very narrow way on working with our case, the Virginia Olsen case, and the people connected with it, and finishing this book. And we weren't really attached to any community. And when the book was finished, that was the moment when we were able to start interacting with others for the first time and to talk about it. And we weren't really sure what we were going to get. And what we found was not only a pleasant surprise, it was really transformative for me in lots of different ways. We were working with our publisher, and Steve Jackson, who was one of the co-owners of Wild Blue, who since passed away this fall. He was a New York Times bestselling true crime writer. And I remember when we were in the last weeks of before publication, before the final text was set, his house in Florida had flooded, and we were still struggling to figure out some of these last revisions and some problems with one of the chapters I just couldn't work out. And I remember Steve reaching out and saying, I've got an idea. Do you mind if I take a go at this? I think I know how we could fix this. And he sent us some detailed notes. He went down to a bar and was looking at our manuscript and sent us these detailed notes and was like, "Okay, gentlemen, take what you can with this. Kind of, let's fix this and get this thing done. I'm exhausted." And I remember I told Cameron, like, this is not like totally like normal. Like, we had this like New York Times bestselling author who's like up late stressing over our kind of manuscript and the level of notes that he was giving to help us fix this issue. And it just struck me as really generous, and it just inspired me to want to do my best towards the very end as well. And when we started promoting the book, the thing I will never forget is, our first interview we recorded on December 6, 2025, which is today. It's the 1-year anniversary. We recorded with Nick Edwards of True Crime Garage fame, and this was the first interview we had ever done surrounding this book. And the interview was going to air sometime in mid-February. And I remember being really nervous and not sure what to expect, because this was the first person from the kind of true crime community outside the people with our publisher who we had interacted with directly. And I haven't told this story to Nick, even though I plan on reaching out and kind of telling him how much this meant to us as we start 2026. But I remember we popped on and I heard his distinctive voice come on through our computer, And one of the first things he told us was, he said, welcome, gentlemen. I am I know this is the maiden voyage for our show. This was a new venture he was doing. And I know it's your first book. And I just want you to know I'm going to do everything in my power not to muck this up for you. And this is before we had really any exchange for him. And the idea that someone who we really deeply respected in him was reassuring us right away he was going to do everything possible to make sure that we were in a good position as we were starting off to promote the book. It was just I was just very touched by the entire thing. And that level of generosity he showed was one that we experienced consistently throughout 2025 with you and your program, and giving us just the space and time to talk about this case and our experience researching and working on it and what it meant to us and our lives. I felt like your show helped me to kind of understand what this experience was about, what we were doing, and kind of why we were doing it in a different way than we had before, beyond just talking about the case. Dan Zapansky, Burl Bear, and all the different people that we talked to that were that are fairly prominent people in this community. We just received really consistent support, and that's still to this day. I think that now that the book is kind of done, it's 2026 in some ways is a transition year for me. But one of the things I'm bringing into this year, and what I want to carry forward, is just the kindness and generosity that I was shown, trying to pay that forward to other people, and just I just feel very thankful to be a part of this community. I didn't really have any expectation or felt like I had a right to receive the level of support that we have, but from, you go into one of these things and you're expecting that, I need to fight. I need to get this stuff out there and fight. And in fact, we didn't really have to do that for the most part. I think that at least within the true crime community, we just found lots of fellow travelers who kind of were very interested in our work and in us, and voice nothing but support through this process. And so as I start 2026, I guess I just want to begin that with just an awareness of the gratitude. I'm still trying to figure out what is next for me, what this next book or project's going to be, how I can continue to kind of advocate for the Olson case and work on that as well. And that's a balance that I'll figure out over time. But as I kind of juggle that, what I don't want to be lost is just of just how much I have benefited from the kindness and love of other people, and how no matter what is going on, no matter how stressful or problems that kind of come up, that support system is there and everything will ultimately be okay.
Thanks, Brian, and everybody else. I think that's a great spot to stop for today. Tomorrow we'll be back with the second part of the listeners episode with Marie again and another listener, Joelle Bruner. I hope everyone is enjoying their holidays. Thanks for joining us for this awesome conversation. I'm Jason Blair, and this is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. We'll see you guys again tomorrow.